All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started here. I just wanted to start by welcoming everybody to Regen Network's CarbonPlus Credit webinar. I'm going to stop my screen share here and get a chance to see my esteemed guests. We're really excited to have you here today. My name is Dave Fortson. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Regen Network, and I'm also the CEO of LOACOM, a movement building and marketing agency out of Santa Barbara, California. I'd like to welcome our other panelists, including Christian Shearer, CEO of Regen Network, Toby Grogan from ImpactAg, Julie Mettenburg from the Tallgrass Network, and Jim Pittman, Regen Network Senior Ecological Economist. First of all, I'd like to start by orienting all of us on how to engage today. Our fourth panelists will each take some time to outline their focus area. Jim, by starting helping us better understand the state of the carbon market and related ecosystem services market. Christian's then going to outline Regen Network's CarbonPlus Credit and Regen Registry. Toby is going to take us into how CarbonPlus Credit intersects with ImpactAg and the Wilmot Farm down in Australia. And Julie is going to bring this all back down into the soil, how a market-based solution like the CarbonPlus Credit actually matters in the ground and on the ground for improving soil health. So we're going to be presenting for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to give you all the opportunity to share your own thoughts and questions and comments. Please feel free to submit your question using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen as our preferred method. And if you want to chat amongst yourselves, please go ahead and use a chat function where you can chat to all the participants, everyone here on the call, as well as any of the panelists. I'll do my best to surface any questions that need timely response, but otherwise we're going to save the majority of the Q&A for after the presentation at about 2:45 Pacific. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and we are going to encourage you to share it widely with your team and anyone else in your network you think would find this valuable. And I'd like to start today by setting the field, right? It's something we do a lot here at Regen Network. Anytime, we've got busy days and so much going on, it's good to kind of find ourselves and get present. So, it's clear that we're living in a totally wild time, right? It's tumultuous, it's uncertain, dynamic, vibrant, and clearly we're in an inflection point for our species and the rest of the species on this planet. And today, with over 100 people registered, all of us are landing at the same place and at the same time and same moment together. Clearly, we're dedicated to doing our part as individuals, as companies, and as organizations or enterprises to address the ever-present issue of climate change. So I'd like you to consider for a moment the journey that brought you here in your careers or personally, this life path that literally is landing us here at the same moment. Holding that in mind, I'd love for anyone inspired out there who's listening or participating to put in the chat, little chat at the bottom of your Zoom toggle, a word or short sentence about what you are grateful for at this moment. So if you can, please go ahead and put in the chat function anything that you are grateful for at this moment. I'll set the tone here. You can can chat to everyone. Ooh, or did I allow that to happen? Yeah. All right, thank you, Amanda. Community, me too. Any other gratitudes down in the chat? And please, choose to all panelists and attendees. Peter's appreciating organic coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, but if I was, I would go that route. Please throw up any other gratitudes you have here in the chat. Thank you so much. Corey, good to see you from Regen. Thanks for joining us. Excellent. All right, well, feel free to keep throwing in your chats, your gratitudes. We're going to be using this a couple different times throughout the presentation here. So, what we want to first do is try to figure out who's in the room. There, is a large group of us. I think we probably come from a number of different places around the country, if not the world. And we have a little poll here just to find out if you are a potential buyer of ecosystem service credits or the CarbonPlus credit. if you're a potential seller of carbon credits or ecosystem service credits, or you're just here to learn. So we're going to go ahead and launch this poll. It's anonymous, and we'd love to hear from you if you just want to quickly let us know if you're a potential buyer, potential seller, or just here to learn a little bit more about ecosystem service credits. All right, we've got pretty good participation. 47 people out of the 57 online have already voted. Nice job. All right, lots of interest and lots of sellers. I'm going to share the results. So now you know, panelists, we've got a lot of potential sellers of ecosystem service credits here and people who are poking around to find out more about what we're doing. Great. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and launch in. So I'd first like to start by introducing Jim Pittman. Jim's part of the Regen Network team. He's an economist by trade, and he's been helping guide us in better understanding the environment for ecosystem service credits. And Jim's going to kind of bring forth a little bit more understanding of the bigger picture of ecosystem service credits, as well as the CarbonPlus credit and kind of where it might fit into the environment. So Jim, with no further ado, please take it away.
Great, thanks, David. Well, first, let me thank all the other panelists for being here and all the attendees. It's really a great opportunity to have this opportunity to introduce our CarbonPlus credits, and I'm excited to be a part of this launch. What I'll do is just frame a little bit in general about the economic precedent that ecosystem services fit into, the importance of connecting ecosystem services to carbon markets, and how the markets that we're participating in are really providing great opportunities for ranchers and farmers to take part in particularly changing the trend when it comes to climate change. A quick quote to start out with that I'm always fond of comes from a gentleman named Gaylord Nelson in 1916. He points out that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. And so I think it's a really important framing for us to focus on in terms of how we're realizing right now, at this stage of human evolution on the planet, the interconnectedness between our economic dynamics and ecological dynamics. And so I'll just mention a couple sources that are important to look at in terms of understanding how natural capital and ecosystem services play into the dynamics we're experiencing economically. The first one is a study by Robert Costanza, friend and colleague of mine, ecological economist who worked with the team to assess the state of ecosystem services. And then also a source called the Natural Capital Declaration that comes from financial institutions. In the case of the study, Costanza and others in 1997 did an assessment of where we stand with natural capital and ecosystem services, and then 10 years later, in 2007, they published a report in 2015 with that summary update. And it essentially frames that in any given year, we received somewhere in the neighborhood of 180 trillion US dollars in 2020 dollars for the value of ecosystem services being generated on the planet. And largely, we don't include assessment of that value in all the economic statistics that we manage and that our countries manage. However, as much as 25 trillion US dollars in 2020 dollars is lost every year in value that natural capital can provide. And that's not just the value in that given year, but that's a loss of natural capital, of healthy ecosystems that will no longer be able to provide that steady ongoing value stream to us. So we have an increasing problem when it comes to natural capital risk and loss of ecosystem services that we're seeing especially prominently in the climate change issue. And that's really why Regen Network has focused on launching this CarbonPlus credit system is to really address this loss. So with that $25 trillion loss in potential value generation every year, we're seeing it really prominently in loss of wetlands and loss of swamps and floodplains that have decreased by about 64% over that study period, coral reefs, tropical forests, and coastal wetland systems. Another area where we're seeing it really prominently, though, is in soil loss, in agricultural systems. And so we understand at Regen Network how essential soil health is to agroecological systems and the ecosystems that are surrounding them. So there's a great opportunity in this loss of natural capital value, ultimately now being about 13% of the total natural capital value that we lost over 10 years. There's a great opportunity for us to work with ranchers and farmers to change that trend. We're seeing a lot of push in this direction for change from banks and financial institutions. Most prominently in 2012, the signing of the Natural Capital Declaration, where there's a recognition by financial institutions that ecosystem services are a global commons, and we need to actually, oh, excuse me, that we need to actually recognize that in our financial decision making, in our business decision making, and develop fiscal measures and market mechanisms and accounting systems to really engage in protecting ecosystem services. So that's where we come in at Regen Network. We're really focused not just on working with the public sector, but really engaging the private sector in carbon markets, in ecosystem service markets. We believe that, as with most of the popular discussion around the planet, that market mechanisms are very effective for responding to climate change and ecosystem service challenges. There are over a handful of mandatory compliance markets in the world when it comes to carbon markets, and many, many more overlapping voluntary markets that are based on the notion that we need to cap global emissions, create allowances for those industries that do have the highest emissions so that we can slowly decrease those allowances and decrease the amount of global emissions, but then give opportunities for nature-based climate solutions through offset mechanisms where farmers and ranchers and land stewards can engage in these markets. So at the Madrid Council of the Parties last year, we saw a really solid indication that demand is expanding very rapidly in these markets. We don't believe that solar energy, renewable energy is really able to fulfill all that demand. There's a huge place in those markets for agroecological systems for farmers, ranchers to take part and to engage natural climate solutions. So that's why we're launching this CarbonPlus Credit system. In particular, to take the transaction costs of engaging in carbon markets from where it is now at over 50% of the amount invested into projects down to less than 20%. So we're making a much more cost-effective way for carbon credit buyers to engage in the markets, and more of their dollars can actually go to implementing these projects. But in our case, actually, we feel that ecosystem services are very important as well. We don't want to just mitigate climate change through carbon credits, but actually get into the adaptation aspects of the dynamics through what are commonly referred to as co-benefits or ecosystem service values. So this is connecting other markets related to water quantity. How do we make sure that the quantity of water that's available for our rural and urban communities to work with and meet their needs is sufficient? Making sure that water quality is clean and of a quality that doesn't negatively impact human health or environmental conditions. Making sure that ecosystems are able to help us in responding to and protecting ourselves from flood events and storm events in that disturbance protection. Making sure that ecosystems aren't negatively affected by the nutrients that we're putting out through our use of fertilizers and so on. As well as protecting endangered species. So each of these categories are categories where there are healthy and emerging ecosystem service markets around the planet. And what we're doing in Regen Network is connecting those two carbon credits and really emphasizing the carbon plus benefit of not just purchasing carbon, not just purchasing associated co-benefits, but really providing funding mechanisms where ranchers and farmers can be compensated for the work that they're doing that's providing all these other facets of value beyond just the carbon value. So that's our focus on, and a little bit of an overview intro. We're really excited about this opportunity to release our CarbonPlus credits into the market. And I guess I'll close with another quote here. A friend and colleague of mine, Herman Daly, sums it up well in a way that I think connects with our food systems well. That in economics, we've really focused too much on the economy's circulatory system. We've neglected to study the digestive tract. So we've looked at throughput and growth and ways to push more of the same food through an ever larger digestive tract. Now we're getting into development, which means eating better food and digesting it more thoroughly, and working with our farmers and ranchers to support healthy food systems in a way that is part of a healthy planet dynamic.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jim, for giving us a bigger picture view of how what is the ecosystem service credit market is like and where we fit in. And I think there's a good opportunity to pass the baton to Christian. Christian, could you maybe give us a more focused view into the CarbonPlus Credit and the Regen Registry, which are two critical parts of the Regen Network ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. And thanks for that intro, James. So glad to be on with you, Toby and Julie. Glad to be on this panel. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if I do this right. Can you see that, David? Okay, great. So let's dive right in. I want to start with a high level of Regen Network, get into the Regen Registry, and then into the CarbonPlus Credit. So Regen Network accelerates a new market that realigns economic health with ecological well-being by providing a way to track, verify, and reward regenerative agriculture and conservation at scale. We do that by providing technological underpinnings that make ecological data and ecological agreements trusted, transparent, and audited. That's where the blockchain comes in. That's where other open source ecological modules comes in. That's where the technological underpinnings of all this come in. On top of that essential infrastructure, we've built Regen Registry, where we're enabling the next generation of ecosystem services credits. At Regen Network, we believe that the ecological credit markets need to be tied to real regeneration, not fragmented into their component parts. There's a way in which we could solve the carbon problem on this world and not really have made much of a better world. Nature-based solutions are packed with co-benefits, and that's what we're really interested in. Not only sequestering the carbon out of the atmosphere, but creating all the co-benefits that really add up to true regeneration into our system. Regen Registry provides a place where a wide variety of different credit classes and methodologies can contribute to the ability of farmers and ranchers and projects to be rewarded for their impact. And in that way, we believe we can see a transition of many, many more farmers and ranchers moving onto the platform and creating impact through their farming. We've started with grasslands, and we're so pleased to have teamed up with ImpactAg and Wilmot Farm for our first issuance. I'm glad to have Toby on this call to tell us more about that. Grasslands, though they represent a smaller potential to sequester carbon per year, present an incredibly hopeful opportunity globally. Grasslands account for about 1/3 of the land across the entire planet. And we've already seen that best management practices like holistic management, rotational grazing, can not only improve the ecological well-being of the site, but also are profitable for the farmers who implement them. And this makes grasslands management and holistic management of animals a really hopeful place to start for regenerative agriculture. Wilmot Farm, the project that's shown here in this example, is an 1,800 hectare farm in New South Wales, Australia. You'll get a chance to meet Toby in a minute, who's a lot more familiar with the operations than I am. They're managing the cattle using best management practices like mob grazing and time-controlled rotational grazing. They've done a phenomenal job of raising the best quality beef as well as improving the ecological outcomes of the site. As part of their CarbonPlus Credit issuance, we monitor 4 areas. I'll walk you through a high-level overview of each and dive a little bit more into how we monitor the soil organic carbon. So first of all, with animal welfare, we rank it on an adherence to national animal welfare standards that track nutrition level, access to water, social contact, and more. We look at soil health based on Cornell University's soil health assessment, looking at both micronutrients and macronutrients over time. And we rank ecosystem health based on the Costanza framework, measuring its organization, its vigor, and its resilience over time. And for soil organic carbon, the Regen Network science team has developed a remote sensing methodology that utilizes a minimum amount of ground truth data and ongoing satellite feed to measure changes in soil organic matter over time. So what we're looking at here is a satellite image overlaid of Wilmot Farm, and those yellow dots you see on the screen are about 25 to 30 soil samples that we've collected from the site. This is the minimal amount of on-the-ground truthing that we needed to be able to correlate that with remote sensing data. So we used bands 2 and 4 from Sentinel satellite data. We've then correlated that with on-the-ground data, and we found a 93.1% correlation between the measurements read from satellite and the measurements we've received on the ground, which have then allowed us to basically take a virtual soil sample of every single pixel across the entire site. So instead of having 25 or 30 or a couple hundred soil samples, we've ended up with tens of thousands of virtual soil samples across the site, giving us a very nuanced understanding of the soil organic carbon across this ranching site. And you can see the changes over time here. And here are the changes from year to year from 2016 through 2019. What's really interesting about this is if you look right in the center of the site, you can see a red patch on one side and a kind of yellow-green patch on the other side. There's actually a fence line that becomes visible with this data because, and I don't know why the ranchers on the ground would have to speak to this more clearly, but somehow it was either the timing of them putting the animals into the one paddock on the right versus the timing of them putting the animals on the paddock on the left. But one of the paddocks did a better job of sequestering carbon than the other. And this is incredibly interesting data and information for us to be able to feed back to those ranchers so that they can then correlate that to the time of year, the amount of rainfall, the type of density that they're putting their animals in those fields, and be able to have a better understanding of what results in carbon sequestration and what doesn't. So in this case, in the case of Wilmot Farm and the CarbonPlus Grasslands credits, Regen Network provides the methodology and the monitoring, but we're also working with third parties to host their methodologies and their projects on Regen Registry as well. So we're already diving into the work to start enabling and onboarding cropping and forestry related projects onto Regen Registry, and eventually we'll host conservation on other custom credits like marine applications and potentially renewable energy applications as well on Regen Registry. There's a whole other side to this marketplace that I should talk about for a second, the buyers of these credits, right? There are literally thousands of companies that are now publicly committed to deeply reducing their carbon footprints, that are actually committing to going climate positive in their operations. These are large and small companies committed to reducing their own scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, and then purchasing offsets for those emissions that they couldn't reduce. This ensures the bright future that they're committing to as a company. You know, we heard about Microsoft at the beginning of this year committing to offsetting all of the carbon that their company's ever produced all the way back to 1975. They're really pushing the way here. So there's a lot more to say about all this, but I encourage you to come onto our website to learn more. If you're interested in registering a project, you have a farm, a ranch, you want to register your project with us, please get on our website to do that. Or if you're interested in purchasing credits, there's a lot more to learn about these credits on our website. That's at www.regen.network. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you so much, Christian. So now we're going to actually pull this and go down under, at least down under from here in California. With us is Toby Grogan from ImpactAg, and who's been a close partner of ours in the development of the CarbonPlus Credit and giving us, you know, real land, real humans, real animals that are going to be affected by the CarbonPlus Credit. So with that said, Toby, can you share with us the relationship between Regen Network, the CarbonPlus Credit, and your team down under?
Sure, thanks, David. So to give everyone a bit of a background to ImpactAg and how we're involved, we've been managing ranches and farms in Australia now for 10 years. And increasingly over that 10 years, we've been seeking to do that in a more of a sustainable manner and more recently in a regenerative manner. And we're doing that to respond to the climate change that our farms and ranches are experiencing, and also to be part of that solution, transition our industry and our assets to be part of that solution. And one of the greatest tools that we can have in transitioning our farms and encouraging others to make that transition is to reward those farmers and ranchers for the benefits that they're providing through ecosystem services that James introduced and the natural capital that they're building and protecting on their farms. So this journey, as I said, started several years ago, and the Wilmot farm is probably the best example that we have in farms that we work with in making that transition and, importantly, collecting all the data that demonstrates their success in that transition. They probably have a better data set than any other farm that I'm aware of in an Australian context, and that is climatic data, that is productivity data, biomass, biodiversity, obviously soil data that we're talking about today. And that has meant that they've developed a treasure trove of information for the likes of Regen Network and others to assess and use that data to create today the CarbonPlus Grasslands Credit. So ImpactAg, our role with the Wilmot Farm and others, and in particular my role, is trying to find ways to measure and monetize the ecosystem services that our farmers and ranchers are generating, protecting or enhancing. And in doing that, there's often a lack of ready-made markets that suit the ranchers and the farmers, or markets that do exist are costly to participate in or too complex. And James touched on that as well. So when we've got a ranch like Wilmot that is got a data bank of demonstrating the improvements that they've made on that asset, that we think we can, that tells a story that is providing an ecosystem service that can be transacted. We look all over the world for partners to work with that would be able to measure, monetize and market those ecosystem service credits. And in this case, Regen Network's been able to provide that service to us. And it's been, an exciting journey that we've been on the last year to share our story and the story of the Wilmot Cattle Company and assist Regen Network certify this credit and bring it to market. So that's ImpactAg, and just to touch on Wilmot Cattle Company and some of the activity and actions that they've undertaken to generate this carbon credit, which I think Julie will be able to talk to some of these points as well. So the Wilmot Cattle Company is 4,500 acres. It's located in Eastern Australia. It is on high fertility soil, high rainfall soil, and they produce beef. They purchased this farm 10 years ago. It was conventionally run, a small number of paddocks and set stocked, meaning that the stock stayed in the one position the whole time. Over the last several years, they have been focusing on the soil and pasture production on that farm, increasing the biodiversity in that system, and focusing on the ecosystem health that grows the grass that their animals eat. And that has resulted in them in the last few years decreasing the size of the paddocks, increasing the size of the herd, and rotating those animals around the farm. And in doing so, they're trying to mimic and the US is a great example, trying to mimic natural herding animals in an environment where they graze a piece of grass infrequently. So they'll graze a piece of grass, move on, and they won't return to that same patch of grass for, in this case, months. And that it just enables a natural ecosystem to recover, regenerate, and that has resulted in increasing soil carbon, increasing infiltration rate of rainwater, increasing biodiversity in the pasture mix itself, increasing biodiversity in the woody species that surround it, the animals that exist on this farm. And at the same time, excitingly, it has also led to increased pasture production for the amount of rainfall that this farm, this ranch receives. So we're protecting the environment, or regenerating the environment. We're increasing productivity for the farmer. And in this case, we're rewarding the farmer for the ecosystem service and the co-benefits that this farm has generated. And that is carbon and the co-benefits that Christian talked through before. So, you know, it's a huge opportunity. Wilmot Cattle Company is a leader in this field. The Regen Network and this credit will enable the leader to be rewarded, and that leader will be a demonstrator to others in my part of the world, and hopefully in the US and others, to make the transition to regenerative agriculture, to pursue and get rewarded for credits such as this one. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Toby. Appreciate it. So pivoting over to Julie from the Tall Grass Network. Julie, maybe you could tell us a little bit about Tall Grass Network and why something like the CarbonPlus Credit matters to you and your organization and the folks who follow you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's very interesting to hear all these perspectives. And I also want to call out a couple of my colleagues, Pablo in Argentina with the Savory Institute, and Deb, one of my close colleagues on this project, actually in Washington. So it's fun to see them on the call. Yeah, I exist at the intersection of a lot of these interests. And so I'm putting on several hats. And just to explain those, I am in Kansas. I did grow up on a farm in a farming family. I'm 6th generation. At the start of the call, David, you asked about, you know, kind of what brought us here. And for me, it was legacy. I think that when you come from farming, you want to be part of a legacy that has to do with having the land go forth from you for whoever may have it in the future, and in great partnerships. And so it needs to be healthy. And there are very few farmers who don't feel that way. But it's very hard to do in the economic situation that we have in farming and the systems that currently exist. And so I came back into farming, it's been more than 10 years ago now, to the family farm in Kansas. And at the same time, so I have that hat on, just we're trying to do a better job on our farm. Similarly, I worked for about 5 years with the Kansas Rural Center in Kansas, working with farmers and trying to help them become more sustainable, practice new methods that would help with all the things we've talked about: water quality, water quantity, soil health, nutrition, you name it. And so I've been involved in advocacy and trying to help farmers make those transitions for a long time. And about 6 years ago, I got involved with the Savory Institute, who's one of the collaborators on this call, I believe, and am heading up efforts in Kansas to help farmers and ranchers adopt holistic management, which can bring to the table a lot of tools and processes for good, healthy soil, water, ecosystem management. And the Tall Grass Network is my organization here on the ground, helping manifest Savory Institute programs and ecology outcome verification here in the Kansas region in general. The final hat I'm wearing is with a new project where I'm more in Toby's position, and it's called the Provenance Company. It's a new organization that my friend Deb and I are part of, and we're actually taking on land for management in Kansas with the explicit purpose of demonstrating a new pathway that can work economically as well as ecologically. So we have a project coming on right now in Western Kansas. It's 2,700 acres, dry land. It's where the aquifer is. So if anyone knows about the Ogallala Aquifer under much of the high plains of North America, it is at great risk of being depleted due to irrigation. And so this is a real sustainability question. How do we farm here and sustain the people here in the system we have while we are trying to do a better job with the resource we have? And so all of these intersections lead to carbon, to figuring out how to monetize carbon. It's what led us to work with Regen Network as a partner to bring what Toby's doing in Australia here to the North American Great Plains. And so we're thrilled to be a partner with Regen Network from in that capacity. A couple of things I just wanted to tie together. The first one is that when we talk about a CarbonPlus credit or monetizing carbon for farmers, it is an incredible lever that we have to help farmers do better by the environment they have. They want to do better, but it's very hard without that economic piece of the equation. And so paying for the farmers' outcomes and ecosystem services and carbon, water, other outcomes becomes a very important lever to advance what we would all want to see in our environment. And so that added income stream, it could make all the difference for a farmer, not just being able to farm differently, but also staying in business right now, to be very honest with you. And so one of our first goals here is to make that economic pathway understandable if we add that carbon credit into the mix. The second thing I'll say about this opportunity from the hat of the Savory Institute Ecology Outcome Verification Program, which I administer here in Kansas with Pablo and others, is that the plus part, the carbon plus piece that Regen Network's bringing to the table gives us a tool to think about measuring what we would call leading indicators. So carbon is a lagging indicator of our success, relative success. But leading indicators are those things like diversity in our system, bare soil in our system, visual cues on the soil surface about are our minerals cycling, is the sunlight cycling, are we capturing what we can in our plant base? So there's a real potential for us to talk about monetizing leading indicators in a way that set everyone up for success, including mitigating floods and droughts and the other types of natural disasters that can befall us when we have a broken ecology around farming. The last thing I'll say that really excites us to be involved with this, Christian, just going back to your photos, we need the data. We need to understand in a real way if what we're doing is translating into these outcomes. And especially when we're talking about carbon, that fence line example is really striking, because as a farmer, you bet I have a lot of questions about what happened there. And if I can learn that from the data that I get from you, it helps me do a better job year over year over year. And so for us to understand how our work translates into carbon in the ground and systemic health is a really, really powerful tool that it's hard for us to know right now. It's hard for us to know that data. And so the data piece is a thing that we are very excited to be working on with you guys to understand. So I believe those are the notes I had for now. If there are more questions, I can answer them, but I'm just excited to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. We appreciate you being here with us today. So with that, we've got a number of questions popping up that I'd like to go ahead and start posing to the team here. They're coming in both chat and Q&A, so I'll try to get to all of them. So thank you for your patience, everybody. Louise asked straight away for Toby, what price are you getting for your credits and who are the buyers?
Good question. The buyers are anyone wanting to buy something with impact, offset activities elsewhere, The price, I will probably throw to Christian on that, around the price discovery process that the Regen Network are undertaking at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason Toby's not giving a really concrete answer on that is because we are just in the final stages of actually issuing those credits. So none of those credits have actually been sold yet, but we have been having sales calls for a couple months in terms of trying to pre-sell these credits. Depending on the volume that a purchaser is interested in buying, we're looking at prices anywhere from about $14 a ton up to around $22 a ton for these credits, for the CarbonPlus credits. And from the response that we've gotten from our corporate potential buyers, that is essentially the range that they've been seeing across the field. So despite the fact that there are carbon credits out there that sell for less than that and carbon credits that sell for more than that, for an agriculturally based credit with the verifiability of the co-benefits associated, that is the price range that we've landed on as seeming very viable here.
Thank you
I
very
also
much.
am
Yeah,
happy about that price because I think it really fits the needs of the producers themselves. You know, as we start to get below $10 a ton and $7 a ton, $5 a ton, then the business model around implementing regenerative practices with the hope of getting a return on that starts to disappear, right? So part of the aim of Regen Network from the very beginning was to inspire a shift in practice. And if we don't have a market price for these credits that doesn't create some of that incentive and that inspiration for farmers, then we're missing the potential that is here.
thank you, Christian. Mark had a question. What methodology is the credit based on? What climates, soil types, cropping systems? Question mark.
Should I take this one again?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have built the remote sensing soil organic carbon methodology with our remote sensing science team. At the basis of it is GHG accounting methods that are shared across methodologies and science that can be applied to many different ecosystem types, right? We've started with New South Wales, Australia, and particularly Wilmot Farm as our pilot location. And we've validated our remote sensing algorithms to the data coming specifically off of Wilmot Farm. Now, we have a few more of ImpactAg's ranching operations located in South Australia that we will then be validating that methodology against to expand out its ability to cover the space. The expectation is as we move to ecologies that start to differ in their characteristics from the ecology that we see at Wilmot Farm, we will have to do a little bit more tweaking of that methodology. Certainly as we get away from ranching and grasslands into cropping or forestry, that methodology will start to look very different. But even within grasslands itself, we expect there to be some variation across the planet.
Thank you. Question, has the virtual soil tests been accepted as a methodology for determining carbon sequestration and carbon offset credits monetization? And Christian or James or anybody could take that one.
Yeah, I mean, I can start with that. We are operating in the voluntary carbon credits markets, which basically means that what's expected of a carbon credit in the voluntary markets is to create a methodology, have a certain amount of peer review associated with that methodology, publish the methodology so that it can be viewed and reviewed by outside parties, and then issue credits. We have followed that entire pathway. When the question asks whether it's been accepted, it certainly isn't part of any government-sanctioned regulatory markets, but is being accepted by the market mechanisms as they're presented to us. So, James, I don't know if you want to chime in there and share a little bit more about voluntary versus regulated, or some context that you might think is useful here. James, you're on mute.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, I'd be happy to comment, and then a little bit on the technical side too. On the market side, the big thing that we're seeing, as I mentioned at the Madrid Council of the Parties last year, demand for carbon offsets is really soaring. It's at a point now where those people who are involved in brokerages or exchanges have their phones ringing off the hook, and the supply, frankly, can't meet the current demand, and especially with all of the approaches that are already approved with methodologies, we don't really have the volume needed in the market in order to respond to the demand and also the urgency of climate change. So I think what we're seeing and what Regen Network is taking part in right now is that forward edge of innovation, making sure that we are prepared for the demand and can meet that demand for carbon credits, because there are dollars going into the market far beyond what the existing supply can provide. I think on the technical side, what's really exciting about Regen Network is the methods that are out there right now. Many of the methods use spot-based soil sampling, which is great for that individual spot. But as we saw in the map that was shown, it leaves a great deal of uncertainty as to what the actual carbon dynamics are in all of those other locations. So ground truth soil samples are certainly an important part of the technological side of affirming what kind of changes there have been in soil carbon stocks. Other tools that are commonly used in different methodologies are actually modeling tools that will use proxy data from an entirely different site and may bear little to no resemblance to the actual site. So what's exciting about the method that we've developed is that the remote sensing tool provides some data that are specific to every single pixel on that particular land area, and we can look at those dynamics in and of themselves, and then also in relation to fluctuations, drought occurrences or other fluctuations in environmental conditions. And then in tandem with soil testing, it provides really what in many ways is the most robust opportunity to look at the specifics of carbon point by point over an entire land area.
And David, can I just jump in there?
Yes, please do.
From a farmer and rancher point of view, and acknowledging some of the comments and questions that are coming up. Australia does have a regulatory soil carbon methodology, and that has been operating for several years, and something that we look at ImpactAg, and we wouldn't rule out participating and indeed have farms entering into that system. But so there is acknowledgement that there is a variety of different markets and methods available. But from a farmer point of view, when we produce a ton of wheat, we seek to sell that ton of wheat into a variety of markets and using a variety of different market mechanisms. What ImpactAg is interested in is exposing the farms and ranchers that we work with to as many of those markets as we can, as so that each individual farm or ranch has the best opportunity to get a transaction for the product or ecosystem service that they're delivering for the best price under the best conditions that suit that farm. So at a small scale, we're looking at providing more choice and more availability for each individual farmer and rancher. And if I look at it from a big scale, the scale of the problem that we're trying to solve here and the scale that James is referring to is so large that we're going to need, in my view, a variety of different market mechanisms to pull enough demand to, pull enough supply rather, to meet demand and have an impact on the problem that we're all trying to solve. So it's about different transaction costs, different price points, different products, and the Regen Network and this credit really fills a space that's missing at the moment for the farms and ranchers that we work for.
Thank you, Toby. So we've got a couple questions related to how much of this compensation reaches the farmer, percentage of the revenue associated with the sale of a carbon credit. And then on a related question, what are your thoughts on the different standards and protocols that are being developed, and how is Regen validating and verifying? So maybe starting with the what flows down to the farmer, or do we know yet?
Yeah, so again, these first credits haven't been actually sold yet, so we can't actually speak about what's actually happened. But when we model this out with the monitoring costs that we know already, with the remote sensing costs that we know already, with the verification costs that we have a fairly good sense of, and then with the expected carbon price that we have on those credits, there's a couple of variables that affect what percentage of the total return goes back to the farmer. First of all, there is an economy of scale here. So the costs of monitoring are fairly similar for a project, despite the size of the project. Right. So, and as much as I wish that wasn't true, because I want people with 1 acre or 5 acre to be able to participate and get paid just as well as someone with 2,000 acres or 5,000 acres, the hard costs of doing the monitoring stay fairly static in both of those situations, which means that as you have a larger piece of land, or we can aggregate different projects, excuse me, together into one project, the percent of the return on that carbon credit sale will go up for those projects. So in working with a project like ImpactAg on a 2,000 hectare property, we're modeling out and hoping to see a return of about 75, 80% of that credit value being returned to the project developers and landowners themselves, as opposed to a lot of other carbon credits that we've seen, that we see 50% and below end up in the hands of the farmers and ranchers.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Massimiliano, I hope I said that right, had a question here. There are some cases where the major obstacles to transition to regen agriculture are the high cost of appropriate equipment, such as no-till drills, especially for small-scale farmers, or the high bureaucratic and monetary investment required by on-farm abattoirs for the integration of animals and farmland far from any slaughterhouse. Rewards for Ecosystem Services wants to be a form of bridge finance to facilitate the regenerative conversion, but will it suffice to break through these high entry barriers? And you say, Julie, I don't know if you want to take a crack at this one, if you have a thought here, and if not, we can popcorn around.
I'm trying to organize my thoughts on that one. Our whole project and mission is about getting to the crux of that question. And I would say that can carbon credits offset all the expense of shifting the paradigm? That's a very, very high bar. And so I do not believe they are the only answer, but I believe they are a required answer in the whole picture. Related to that, I'll just say, in terms of Christian's answer on the cost of this, for us, the carbon credit is a profit loss of its own. It has its costs going into it, and it has the income that we expect to get that will then either be positive or negative. And so, I think that it seems very viable to monetize it, and I think that's the question. Will it be the only business we have? No. Will it replace other things? It might. So I'm just going to say that barrier of change is extremely high, and it has to be probably multifaceted other solutions to help farmers make the change. But if we can't monetize ecosystem services, I don't understand really how we make the change anyway. So it's kind of my perhaps pessimistic but realistic view.
And I can reflect some of those thoughts from an Australian context. The transitional cost does vary depending on a ranch or farm and how they go about doing it. And we've transitioned a lot of farms now. And some of those have been a low cost, but for many people it is a high cost, and that is a challenge to make that transition. And I think transitional finance has a role to play there, beyond ecosystem service credit or carbon, in just the same data that Regen Network collects and manages could be used to demonstrate that that transition has occurred, and payment could be for an ecosystem service at the end of that. So I think there is scope for some upfront payments, for a transitional finance arrangements to overcome that barrier. But at the moment, Regen Network's proposing something that's got a shorter period from, you know, investment to payback for that transition to other methods that we are pursuing, other markets that we are participating in. So that in itself helps to make that transition. And the other thing that will help make that transition is some of these early movers, like the Wilmot Cattle Company, demonstrating that they're getting rewarded for the ecosystem service that they've generated and transacted. And that, I think, will move a lot of people, particularly at scale, and hopefully some of the ranchers and farms that lean more towards the corporate side to make a transition at scale. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Toby. So I'm going to bounce around. Pardon me, everybody. Just want to make sure we get a diverse set of questions here.
David, I'd love to chime in on that one.
Pardon me, please, Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the thing to recognize right now as we're in the early stages of this market is that the conditions are going to change very quickly. We know that banks and financial institutions are recognizing natural capital risk and climate risk. We know there's a recognition of the trillions and trillions of dollars of stranded assets that are posing a risk in countries and in the private sector around the world. There is certainly a need for a longer term set of data and information, or flows rather, supporting the types of mechanisms that would provide lending against carbon credits. But I think over time we're going to see that, and having blockchain tools that are really strongly confirmable, that are immutable records, that really get around or solve some of the problems of double counting, we'll see more innovation in the lending side. So in particular, I think as we see farmers and ranchers locking into long-term forward contracts for future carbon credits, we'll see that opportunity. So what we do know is in the fossil fuel sector, carbon risk right now is being assessed at a level of $30 per ton internally. So we know that there is a risk assessment that's much higher than market prices. We know that some of the downward pressure on prices currently is due to uncertainty of how the Paris Agreement is going to roll out, Article 6 still being negotiated, and some of the oversupply events that we saw under the Kyoto Protocol. But really in these markets, undersupply is a more likely condition. And so I think we're going to see a very rapidly increasing price dynamic. Some analysts have suggested that to really respond to the urgency of climate change, we need a price of $50 to $100 or more per ton. And rather than setting price low and gradually increasing it, that we should actually set price high and gradually decrease it. So I think in the coming years, as Paris Agreement takes effect, we will see that price dynamic increase, and we will start to see some positioning in the lending institutions to leverage against carbon assets and move in the direction of financing that can support project funding up front.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. I had a question from Howard here, and he asked, how important are the concepts of additionality and permanence in the ability to monetize carbon credits? And whoever chooses to answer it, if you could just, for context, just quickly define additionality and permanence.
I'm looking at James here. We discussed this a lot internally. These are really good questions. I think that you have the background and the contextual knowledge to help fill in on this best.
Sure. So additionality, there's a lot of debate around this topic. There are a lot of different ways of defining it. It's important to look at, in additionality, it's important to look at what the baseline is of the carbon dynamic within whatever system we're talking about. So take a farm or a ranch. The question we would ask ourselves in assessing additionality is, what would be the carbon dynamic in the soil if the project that we're undertaking did not happen? And how would that be measured? Now, in soil and most other biotic systems, we know that baseline is very dynamic. It's not going to be staying the same. So it becomes a very complex measurement process. with additionality, then we're assessing, as a result of this project, can we be certain that the project itself is causing changes in carbon? And to what extent are those changes in carbon stocks happening compared to the dynamic baseline? So you can see in the complexities of this definition, it requires a pretty robust information system in order to assess if additionality is a condition that's present. One of the things that's, I think, in some ways more important, though, is this issue of permanence. Do we know that that the carbon that's being held in the soil is going to be held for a very extended duration? And we're really working to balance the need for strong rigor, but then also flexibility in how we assess permanence. There is no absolute assessment of permanence. Even in the definition, we can see that we're trying to assess whether something's permanent, but we actually have to choose a time horizon to assess permanence within. So we're very focused on additionality and permanence in how we're developing our methodology. These will be issues that we engage with our peer review experts on periodically in order to make sure that we're really keeping up with where the market is. And then we want to make sure that we structure contracts that are flexible enough to make sure that if there are any questions about additionality and with permanence, that the buyers and sellers still have a strong position in the market. So one of the reasons, additionality and permanence are two of the reasons why we've instated one solution in our methodology is a really strong buffer mechanism to account for those uncertainties. So making sure that there are buffers of credits that we're choosing to not sell, so that if there is any question about permanence or additionality in the future, we can use those buffers to adjust. So I imagine with this and a few of the other questions, we could go in a lot of detail on the technical details. That's a little bit of an overview, and I think it may be good for us to have some further information as a follow-up to this with some members of our technical team to speak to some of the even finer points.
Thank you, Jim. Question from Nicholas. Are your buyers demanding any sort of additional validation, or what are you doing to ensure them that the carbon is being sequestered?
I guess it's a question about the methodology, right? So what does a buyer need when they're saying to offset the impacts that my company has made, and I'm willing to purchase through Regen Network and through Wilmot Farm to make a claim that our company has become carbon neutral or carbon climate positive through that action? Certainly they need some sort of assurance that that actual act has taken place, right? Some sort of transparency into the fact that this is real. That's actually at the basis of why we started Regen Network. Because oftentimes when you take a flight somewhere and they say, do you want to offset your carbon? You check yes. You have no idea what it is that you just purchased, or what sort of form that carbon came in, or how it represents the fact that you have now offset your flight. We are aiming at creating transparency at a number of different levels. You know, at the technological level with the blockchain, so that you can see the transactions, and at the methodological level, which is, I think, is what this question is really. So in the documentation associated with any of our credits is a publishing of our methodology, our credit class, and our registry guide that gives people a transparency into exactly what processes are followed to be able to take measurements in this way. When appropriate, we also publish data that's associated with those measurements as well. We don't publish all data because it would be a huge amount of data, and there's also privacy concerns associated with it. But we are, from my perspective, moving the bar up in terms of helping give the end client a sort of reassurance that that this carbon has actually been sequestered as it has said it's been done. So on a more technical level, we're doing the monitoring that is called out from the methodology. There's also a verification that's called out. That verification is done by a third party. So in the farm, we're going to be working with a verifier that does other verification as part of their business on the ground in Australia. they will then be checking our methodology and checking to ensure the steps have been gone through so that that methodology is correctly verifying what it says it has verified on the ground. Like I said, I believe we've moved the bar up in terms of creating that sense of assurance.
Thank you, Christian. There's a question from Simon. Is there demand for the ecosystem service on a standalone basis, separated or separate from the carbon credit itself? So, and I open this up to Toby or Julie or anyone who's got, or James, anyone who's got a thought on, you know, do ecosystem services without the carbon, do they have value on a market level?
I think there is developing markets for those other ecosystem services, and the one that springs to mind is biodiversity. And in Australia, in different jurisdictions, there are regulated markets for biodiversity credits to be transacted. The benefit of the Regen Network is its grouping of those co-benefits into one transaction, and a pursuit of extra value for the credit because of those co-benefits. And that's something that also is, you know, that's replicated elsewhere. And there's other examples in Australia in regulatory markets where a carbon credit can be paired with biodiversity credit as well, for, you know, substantial uplift in value. And, you know, with the co-benefits, that's something Regen Network is pursuing as well. And again, it's all about that choice for, you know, for us and the ranchers and farms we represent. It's about providing that choice for that farmer. And James would probably say the same for the market at the other end, providing more choice on whether these are grouped together as a ecosystem service credit with a number of co-benefits, or it's standalone. From my viewpoint, it's just great to have choice.
Great, thank you, Toby. And again, pardon me, everyone, I'm kind of hopping around here just to get a breadth of questions. We have another.
David, I'm happy to chime in on that one too, if it helps.
Yeah, hold on just a sec. Do we have 22 minutes, folks? I just want to let you know that we are going to use all of our time here today. Go to 3:30 strong and try to get to as many of these as possible. And I will copy the Q&A and see if we can get all the answers typed out for those that are not answered live. So thank you again for your patience. Jen, you want to go ahead and finish that one up?
Yeah, I appreciate Toby's point on choice, and in particular highlighting, you know, biodiversity credits are one of the clearest examples where there are standalone markets in Australia and other locations around the world. I think we're going to see more and more motion in the realm of these ecosystem service markets. There are models, as I mentioned earlier, in nutrient trading, water supply, water quality, biodiversity, and several other areas. I think what the big opportunity is with CarbonPlus and other innovations in the carbon market right now is, to some extent, the slowness of development of ecosystem service markets has been due to the lack of sufficient information on the causality of what land management practices are affecting those ecosystem dynamics. So one of the ones I'm excited about, for example, is it's fairly obvious that a regenerative agriculture operation, as we actually look at them over time, whether it be crop-based agriculture or livestock, has a profound effect on water infiltration and reducing flood risk in downstream areas. We haven't really seen a huge emergence of ecosystem service markets in the realm of flood protection because we haven't really had a clear information source as to what land management practices can be measured as having a positive impact on flood protection. Now, as we look at how we're actually able to measure and assess and quantify and monetize carbon in agroecological systems, we have that information stream. And so I think not only just standalone ecosystem service markets where there already is value, I think the big opportunity is taking ecosystem services beyond just a co-benefit and an add-on, and actually seeing bundled ecosystem service value through innovations like CarbonPlus and the information systems that we're developing.
I would just like to chime in. You know, I mentioned that I'm working with the Savory Institute with ecology outcome verification, and we're trying to crack the nut as well in terms of how do we attach these benefits to the end consumer in terms of the meat they buy, the leather they wear, the wool. and making great progress with that. And blockchain is a really important technology to help with that. It's like a truth machine to get from the animal and the land all the way to the end consumer. And so I think it's a really parallel situation in terms of you have a product. So for us, it might be meat, wool, carbon, and how do we attach these benefits to it as it travels through that chain? And I think it's part of the whole ecosystem maybe of how we monetize what we're doing. So I just wanted to throw that in as well.
That's great context, Julie. Thank you for sharing. So David had a question. Corporate buyers usually require traditional certification schemes or labels, VCS as an example, for the credits they purchase. How would you position your CarbonPlus credits in that context? Christian?
Sure, I'm happy to start here. We are operating in the voluntary markets, which is also where Verra, VCS, Gold Standard are also operating. There's a misconception by a lot of folks that like Gold Standard is just a really good name for that company. It gives people the idea that it's a standard. So we get that question a lot. They're like, are you following the gold standard? Like, no, we've produced our own methodologies just like they have, and then publish those, get some peer review associated with them, respond to really tough questions, make sure that we're actually doing the science in a very rigorous way, and issue credits based on that. So one thing that I will acknowledge here is first to market advantage. Verra and Gold Standard are known by the entire market. They're known, they're trusted. From a corporate risk perspective, a corporation it feels like a pretty easy yes for them to purchase a credit that's produced by Verra or Gold Standard, because the market has already validated that those companies are doing good work. Regen Network is innovating in some really important ways. Like farmers and ranchers, you're not going to be able to participate with Verra and Gold Standard to have a carbon credit issued and brought to market for you. Regen Network is very interested in accelerating the adoption of regenerative agriculture and getting that into the carbon markets. At some point, we will be one of the players in the markets. It's just as well accepted as the others. But for now, we're going to have to go through that gray area where people give a little bit of extra look, a little bit of extra questioning, have our science really questioned in and out. And we totally invite that because our methodologies are just as rigorous.
Thank you, Christian. Question here from Debbie. Have you had discussions about industry partnerships to help offset and or distribute transitional costs? I assume transitional into regenerative agriculture or more ecologically sensitive ways of doing business.
I don't know if anyone else wants to take that. I could take that a little bit. I've been on, literally 100 sales calls with various different corporations, reaching out to them, talking to them about these CarbonPlus credits. And a response that we've gotten a number of times from companies is, that's really cool. Could we do that in my supply? They're talking about in setting, basically, right? And so they're really interested in potentially putting money up front to help monitor, verify, report on the baseline and ongoing carbon changes of the agricultural systems within their supply chain. Oftentimes they say we don't need the formality of actually issuing credits. They just want to be able to claim those carbon changes on their scope 3 accounting for their company. So in that way, we have seen corporate interest in investing upfront into transition of their supply system. But other than that, I personally haven't had engagements with companies approaching us interested in putting the capital up front. As James was saying earlier, I absolutely expect these markets to mature to the point where we have enough data to understand that when a ranch employs specific best management practices on that land, there's enough data to have a strong assumption that that is going to translate into carbon sequestration and then the sale of those credits. And when that market validation is there, we then clearly have a place for lending opportunities and impact investing opportunities to play that provision of capital role up front.
I think also, David, it's about us educating the market as well. So as the market improves, those transactional costs will come down, which means more people can participate. But perhaps the market, and James might know more here, perhaps the market's not aware of some of the transitional costs that Julie was talking to exist, and therefore, you know, there is a requirement for mechanisms to be made to help farmers make that transition. So, you know, we need to make the market aware through platforms like Regen Network that some of those barriers may exist.
Jim?
Yeah, I would love to add on. I think these are great points, and that awareness, I think, is the biggest opportunity. It's really the goal, if we want to look at any sort of aspects of collaborative funding between buyers or any other player in the market, you know, financial institutions and those who are producing carbon credits, is providing ways to support faster innovation with the information that we have. And so one of the ways that we're structuring our business model is to allow for white labeling systems, in-setting systems, bespoke credit systems that are tailored specific to the need or the context. And I think as buyers become more savvy in this marketplace, as they start to see that their products can actually gain a price premium, as you know, by including the carbon or the carbon plus, the ecosystem service values in the story of their product or service, we will see some more interest in those collaborative financing models as risk analysis gets more advanced. And especially as buyers get into forward contracts or recognizing that by engaging in some sort of futures position for a future carbon credit flow, they may actually be able to reduce their costs over time than delaying purchasing. I think they'll be looking for ways to engage. The good news about the Regen system is we're not just tailoring our systems to support a single credit. We're designing a comprehensive system supported by the blockchain that gets at the underlying ecosystem process and function dynamics, the ecological outcomes data systems and information systems that can support innovation in a wide range of credit opportunities. And I think that's going to be what's needed in order to support the kind of innovation in collaborative financing models like the ideas we're discussing today.
Thank you, Jim. Question on, speaking of bespoke agreements, do you see it possible to have bespoke agreements regarding the socioeconomic, not just the ecological dimension, tied to some socioeconomic indicators? Question mark.
You know, I'll chime in on this one because it's top of mind. I said that I came from the Kansas Rural Center working on rural community issues, and if you want to pinpoint maybe both root cause and result of the system we've had that leads us here, the way we value those people in the communities is really stark. So, you know, we struggle to keep people on the land, quite frankly. And so that's the question I kind of come into this call with and also leave. And if I could have spoken to socioeconomic pluses for Carbon Plus, I would have, but I'd like to challenge us all to think about that. We're just learning the nature of those challenges. I've been here my whole life, but I'm still learning the nature of the socioeconomic challenge. And that's both the people who are producing the agriculture outputs, but also the people consuming the agriculture outputs. Is there a nutrition measure? Is there a, you know, calories or nutrient produced measure? Certainly it seems like we could and should be thinking about questions like that. So I think it's worth keeping top of mind. I appreciate the question.
Other thoughts there from the panel? Toby?
I think from a social point of view, farmers and ranchers operating in a changing environment, changing climate, under more conventional systems are getting increasingly squeezed between increasing costs of inputs and the large amount of inputs required, and comparing that to often prices for their commodities not changing in reflection of those increasing costs of inputs, all while operating in a more and more challenging climate. So from a social point of view, our farms and ranches operate with lower inputs, are building resilience into their farm to respond, to adapt to this changing climate and also be more resilient to that changing climate, whilst also producing a new commodity or range of commodities, ecosystem services, that if we can reward them for, I think you're improving the socioeconomic condition of those farmers behind the farm gate. Absolutely. It has a inherent inbuilt socioeconomic benefit, an ecosystem service credit going to a farmer or rancher.
Thank you, Toby. So I had a question here. Are there thoughts of combining ecosystem service credits with a labeling scheme to add value to agricultural products?
Well, that's what I was referencing in terms of programs like ecology outcome verification with the Savory Institute, which might produce a land to market sticker on your product in the market as a consumer link. So I mean, as a producer, it can feel a little sometimes inundating, all the programs that try to do that. So I'll just weigh in that that's an ongoing project, and this feels like it fits within that in terms of measuring carbon and the ecosystem outcomes that go with carbon along the chain to the consumer, for sure.
Yeah, and that's something that we consider on a case by case. The Wilmot Cattle Company has in the past produced a branded product, and they will again in future, and this will aid them in better positioning or branding that product. But a branded product isn't the end game for every farmer and rancher, because often they lose some flexibility in their operation, or they have to commit themselves to producing a certain product at a certain time of year, consistently in a changing environment, etc. So a branded product for that ultimate value increase is the end game for some, but it's certainly not the end game for all agricultural producers. It just comes back to that point I've touched on a few times today around providing choice for those producers. Some will have a enterprise that facilitates a branded product. Others are going to produce just a commodity product into a commodity market, and that's okay. What we're trying to do here is turn carbon into a commodity market as well. Thanks.
One of the things I know from working with food and beverage companies is that it's a pretty low margin business to be a brand selling, whatever it might be, potato chips or juice or beef, and a lot of those brands that are on the front edge of environmental friendliness have already added premiums to the level that they think is going to be able to be for their consumers. They've already said, this is organic, this is fair trade, you're already getting the best, and they've bumped up the price a little bit for that. What I've understood from those, from working with those companies, is that they don't believe that they're going to be able to charge much more for a regeneratively produced product. But that being said, there's something innovative that's possible here. We're in talks with a chocolate company, one of the largest cacao producers in the world, and they were talking about the idea of producing side-by-side chocolate bars that you could choose on the shelf to buy the chocolate bar without the carbon credits associated with it, or the one with the carbon credits associated with it. And on the back of that chocolate bar could be a little barcode that you could scan, and you could actually claim those carbon credits for yourself and have them show up in your digital wallet. This is a functionality that blockchain actually does a great job in making possible. And then the person could claim those credits, right in and see the details of a farm like Wilmot Farm and how the managers are ranching that farm and what amount of carbon was sequestered over time, et cetera. So this, even fractional ownerships of tons of carbon become possible in that. Someone could buy a 25-cent popsicle and get a fractional ownership of a ton of carbon through this system. It's totally technologically possible, and I expect to see that become more prevalent in the markets.
Wonderful. James, do you have one more thought here?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most exciting parts. I mean, we've touched on it earlier in terms of white labeling, insetting, bespoke credit systems. I think better than just the notion that a price premium could be applied and there could be a special system that's designed is there's a clearer sense of how that value dynamic is actually happening. Every product in the world now is giving you a story about their sustainability or their regenerative impacts. Usually it's a qualitative narrative story. And what the ecological outcome systems that we're developing and the opportunity to have social outcomes that are measurable and that are connected directly to the different management and product practices is that we would actually have a measurable way to assess that and be able to quantify it for the labels in a way that really supports the price premium. I think it speaks perfectly to what Julie's mentioning too about mentioned earlier about not just responding to lagging indicators, but also then leading indicators, that there can be a much broader presentation of the story of the exact management practices that are changing, how those are speaking to leading indicators, lagging indicators, and exactly how much they're changing in a quantified way.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I'd like to bring us to a close here, and I want to recognize those of you, 39 of you still on. Really appreciate you being here all the way to the end. We have still 25 open questions that we are going to do our best to answer in a text format. We have recorded this call, and we will publish that to everyone who registered. And wanted to give a big thank you to all of you panelists from, I think we're at least 3 different time zones on here, different parts of the world, and super grateful for all of you joining us today to get help share a vision for the CarbonPlus Credit and what Regen Network is doing, and for all of you attending who are out there in the field or on the land or in the boardroom trying to make a better world in whatever way you know how. So for those of you who are interested in further information, for those of you who are interested in selling credits, please go to Regen Network. You can go to list your project or sign up, and it'll take you to a place where you can enter your information. And as we move to our next phase in our technology, you'll be able to list projects and qualify to be able to sell credits on the Regen Registry. And for those of you interested in buying carbon credits, the CarbonPlus Credit is out, and we are having one-on-one conversations with our sales team to figure out how to get you and to a clean way to meet your climate goals via the CarbonPlus Credit and our partnerships with ImpactAg. So really exciting work here, team. Really appreciate everyone's attention today. And remember to go to regen.network. And if you have questions, please follow up with us directly or find us on the internet. But in the meantime, appreciate everyone's time and energy today, and have a great one. We will catch you out in the world again. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yep. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.